The NFL rulebook is quite long, as you can probably imagine. There are 95 pages of rules that cover every single element of the game and every possible scenario. Obviously, there are some rules that rarely or never come into play, and that you don't expect any player to know. For example, I don't expect any player to know what Rule 17, Section 1, Article 3 entails, which is the rule saying what happens if a game can no longer be played because it's dark outside and the stadium in which the game is being played does not have any lights. And I'm sure many players were baffled after the fair catch kick that occurred in the 2024 Thursday Night Football game between the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers, seeing as it was the first successful fair catch kick in half a century. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But there are many rules that you can't expect the players to know. You expect them to know when the clock stops versus when it runs, how many yards you need to get a first down, and you expect them to know rules that are important to their position, such as knowing which blocks are allowed and which blocks are illegal if you're an offensive lineman, or knowing how many feet in bounds you need to have and what you have to do to catch the ball if you are a wide receiver. Well, I bring that up because this man right here is New York Jets quarterback Brooks Bollinger. In 2005, the Jets were in somewhat of a quarterback hell, as after a 2004 season where they made it to the divisional round and would have made it to the AFC Championship if they had even the slightest bit of competence at the kicker position, they were one of the worst teams in football, thanks in part to Chad Pennington and Jay Fiedler getting injured after the third week of the season. And since 42-year-old and former first overall pick Vinny Testaverde was either completely injured or completely washed by this point. So for most of the season, the Jets had to turn to this man to command their offense. Third-year quarterback and former sixth-round pick Brooks Bollinger. As we all know, sixth-round picks at quarterbacks never do anything in the NFL. So it's no surprise that this did not work out. And I don't think it will shock anyone to know that the Jets have the fourth worst offense in football in points scored, the second worst offense in yards gained, the third worst offense in passing touchdowns, and the fifth worst offense in passing yards. And part of why that was the case was because Brooks Bollinger was really freaking terrible. You're going to see how terrible he was in just a bit. But before I get to that, make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, hype up that video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for hyping up the video, and for turning on that notification bell. And with that in mind, let's get back to talking about the Jets quarterback that couldn't pilot the Jets offense. Bollinger was one of the worst quarterbacks in football throughout the 2005 season, as you can tell from all these lowlights. The Jets were going nowhere with him under center. There were 32 quarterbacks to attempt at least 250 passes during the 2005 season. Of those 32, Bollinger was near the bottom in just about every single category. In completion percentage, his 56.4% mark ranked 26th. In sack percentage, seeing as he threw 266 passes and got sacked 32 times, his 10.7% sack mark ranked 31st, only better than David Carr, who was infamously tortured by that Houston Texans offensive line. In passer rating, his 72.9 rating ranked 25th. In yards per attempt, his 5.9 yards per attempt ranked 31st, only better than Kyle Orton. And in success rate, so the percentage of passes that gained at least 40% of the yards needed on first down, 60% of the yards needed on second down, or 100% of the yards on third or fourth down, Bollinger ranked 30th, only out of Kyle Orton and Anthony Wright. He couldn't stay on schedule. There's a reason that the Jets' offense stalled just about every time Bollinger was on the field. But just how bad was he? Well, there's one play that sums up his tenure in New York pretty well as sums up his entire time as a quarterback. And for that, we have to go in front of a national television audience to Sunday Night Football on November 27, 2005, when the New York Jets were taking on the New Orleans Saints of Baton Rouge of San Antonio of New York of Anaheim. Today, the league has the power to flex out of primetime matchups that are unattractive. Back in 2005, this was never an option, hence why this game remained on Sunday Night Football, despite the fact that both the Jets and Saints enter this game with a 2-8 record and had nothing to play for whatsoever. If you're ever upset about a Sunday Night Football matchup seeming bad on paper, just know that in the 21st century, you could be stuck with a game like this, where both teams were a combined 4-16 as the marquee matchup, and there was absolutely nothing that you could do about it. However, if a game was going to stink on paper and mean absolutely nothing, at least it could make up for it by being good, close, and competitive. And seeing as this game was never decided by more than one possession at any given moment, I think it's fair to say that this game accomplished that objective. When Aaron Brooks hit Devery Henderson from 30 yards out to give the Saints a 21-19 lead, and now I have no idea why the Saints didn't go for two here, the Jets now had a chance to respond. And respond they did, as the Jets did a nice job moving the ball down the field, picking up a couple of first downs in the process, thanks to some completions by Bollinger, as he went 2 for 2 on third down. Now, after all that, it was 3rd and 10. The Jets had the ball at the 34-yard line, so you're in field goal range. Obviously, you want to get the first down, get closer, and kill some more clock. Ideally, you want to put yourself in a position where the Saints can never get the ball back, and you win it with a walk-off field goal by a final score of 22-21. But as long as you don't get sacked here, you should be okay. Instead, this happens, and Brooks Bollinger decides to do this.
It would be about 51 from here, maybe 52. Blitz coming. Bollinger unloads, just hangs it up there. Not a soul close to it as Coles is standing there with Fakir Brown.
Intentional grounding, offense, on the quarterback. Ball be placed at the spot of the foul. Loss of down, 4th down.
Well, the good news is that it's not a sack. The bad news, it's intentional grounding. There was a free rusher off the edge, and Bollinger just threw it up, miles away from the closest receiver, which in this case was Lavernius Coles. Rule 8, Section 2 covers what intentional grounding is and what it isn't. And by the definition, this was intentional grounding. As Article 1 of the rules states, it is a foul for intentional grounding if a passer facing an imminent loss of yardage because of pressure from the defense throws a forward pass that is not in the direction of an originally eligible offensive receiver. There was imminent pressure for a sack to take them out of field goal range, the pass went forward, and the ball landed in a completely different zip code. There is an exception if there was physical contact that altered the ball, which obviously was not the case here. There is also an exception if the quarterback was outside of the pocket, but obviously that was not the case here. This is grounding. It carries a loss of down, it's a loss of yardage, and it's a big one, because in this case, it takes you out of field goal range. The Jets, instead of potentially lining up for the go-ahead field goal, were now going to have to punt it away, and the Jets ended up losing the game 21-19 as a result. Just a costly penalty at the worst possible time. Except, Brooks Bollinger didn't know it was a penalty, because somehow an NFL quarterback had no idea what intentional grounding was. It was the first time in his NFL career he had been called for intentional grounding, and he had no idea what it was or what it entailed. As he said after the game on that sequence, "I don't know the rules. Pressure was coming. I was trying to get rid of it to the wrong place, obviously." Seriously, imagine an offensive lineman saying that he didn't know what holding was and that you couldn't grab inside the collar. Imagine a cornerback saying that he didn't know what pass interference was and that you couldn't tackle the receiver while the ball was in the air. they'd sound ridiculously stupid and incompetent. You'd wonder how they ever made it this far playing their position. And yet, somehow, an actual NFL quarterback who had been in the league for 3 years at this point and presumably knew the game of football and how it worked, had no idea that intentional grounding was a thing. And that you couldn't just chuck the ball up to no one when there was a man in your face about to sack you. Intentional grounding was not a new concept or rule, and it had not been modified in any way of note. This is not a situation where a rule was in place the previous season, then it gets changed, and there's some confusion as to what it's like for the new year. A quarterback just openly admitted that he didn't know what intentional grounding was. And obviously, we've seen players admit before that they didn't know the rules. Donovan McNabb infamously admitted after a 2008 game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cincinnati Bengals that he didn't know that games could end in a tie. He was not the last to admit it either. We've seen confusing plays where no one knows what the rule is. But those are extremely rare, once-in-a-blue-moon situations. That is not the case with freaking intentional grounding, as in a penalty that comes up quite often and is a penalty that every quarterback in football should know. Remember how I said that Bollinger had the second highest sack rate of any quarterback in football during the 2005 season? It's actually quite impressive that he got sacked so much if he thought he could just throw the ball into the dirt or anywhere when there was a man in his face, seeing as intentional grounding penalties do not count as sacks against you. To get sacked that much with that in mind? Genuinely impressive how this man was a quarterback in the NFL. I know the Jets didn't have a ton of options by this point, with their starter hurt, their backup hurt, and their third stringer basically coming off of the couch and being eligible for Social Security. But come on. They couldn't find a quarterback that knew the rules of a sport? They couldn't find a guy to do the bare minimum? I don't think it's going to surprise you that Bollinger did not exactly have a successful career in the NFL. He bounced around a couple of teams after the 2005 season, getting traded to the Minnesota Vikings in 2006 and playing in the league until 2008. After that 2005 season with the Jets, Bollinger started one more game, when in 2007, he started a Week 10 game for the Vikings against the Green Bay Packers. The Vikings lost that game 34-0, so that game went as well as you probably would have expected. Whether he knew intentional grounding or not by that point, I don't know. But for what it's worth, in 2005, he got called for intentional grounding literally the very next week against the New England Patriots, and then got called for it 2 weeks later against the Miami Dolphins. At some point, he'll understand what the rule is. Obviously, 2005 was not the time. And look, obviously, every quarterback is going to get called for grounding at some point. There will be some sort of miscommunication, or you'll try and make some heroic play to avoid a sack, and you'll throw it in the direction of no one. Or you'll think that a player is going to be there, and he's not. It happens. Look, Tom Brady is maybe the greatest quarterback of all time. He got called for intentional grounding in a Super Bowl. Everyone has brain farts like that at some point. But to not even realize it was a brain fart? To not even know that intentional grounding is a rule? As an NFL quarterback? And to do it to take your team out of field goal range? To complain about the call because you don't know it's a penalty? I've got nothing. Truly one of the craziest blunders by any quarterback in Jets history. Because on this November night in 2005, Bollinger went to the Saints and confessed his sins, with the sin being that he didn't read the rulebook. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.